A presidential earthquake on a Sunday afternoon in July. President Biden dropping out of the 2024 presidential race, a stunning end to a 50-year political career, culminating in caving to pressure from fellow Democrats to end his bid for re-election after his abysmal debate performance back in June. Hello and welcome everybody to your local election headquarters. All of us rushing into the stream center here for a breaking news live stream alongside WFLA political anchor Ty Russell, our longtime, of course, political analyst Tara Newsom of St. Petersburg College. Welcome into the stream center. We're going to be bringing in your comments featuring what you have to say, reacting to historic news, something that we have seen really coming over the last several days, but now it is officially official. President Biden dropping out of the race, and Ty, as we understand it, in just the last 10, 15 minutes, endorsing Kamala Harris for president. Doesn't mean that she's the nominee. We'll get into that with Tara in just a moment. But Ty, what are we hearing from the White House?
Well, from the White House, we are hearing from actually the president. He released a statement, a letter that he posted on X today, just announcing that he will no longer seek re-election. He starts off that statement. I want to read it in its entirety just so you all can hear from the president himself. He begins with, "My fellow Americans, over the past 3.5 years, we have made great progress as a nation. Today, America has the strongest economy in the world. We've made historic investments in rebuilding our nation, in lowering prescription drug costs for seniors, and in expanding affordable health care to a record number of Americans. We've provided critically needed care to 1 million veterans exposed to toxic substances, passed the first gun safety law in 30 years, appointed the first African-American woman to the Supreme Court, and passed the most significant climate legislation in the history of the world. America has never been better positioned to lead them than we are today. I know none of this could have been done without you, the American people. Together, we overcame a once-in-a-century pandemic and the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. We've protected and preserved our democracy, and we've revitalized and strengthened our alliances around the world. It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president. And while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. I will speak to the nation later this week in more detail about my decision. For now, let me express my deepest gratitude to all those who have worked so hard to see me reelected. I want to thank Vice President Kamala Harris for being an extraordinary partner in all this work. And let me express my heartfelt appreciation to the American people for the faith and trust you have placed in me. I believe today what I always have, that there is nothing America can't do when we do it together. We just have to remember we are the United States of America, and it is signed Joseph Biden."
Let's bring in Tara. Tara, it was just a random, or it felt like a random Sunday when we were all, Ty was out, we were all out, we rushed in here, and you hear the news, your immediate reaction is what?
On Friday, we had a little idea that this could be coming, but most of us were holding our breath, thinking that he was going to hold out for another couple of weeks. Joe Biden was so defiant in the last few times that he addressed other leaders and the public that he was really digging in and going to hold on to the nomination. So I think the reason why we were all a little bit surprised is it's Sunday afternoon, but I think time is of the essence. And I think that unifying after the momentum that came out of the RNC was so important to him that he put party and country over himself, and he was a true statesman. And I think he probably made the calculus that better now than wait another day and let the games really begin, in terms of only a few weeks left until the Democratic National Convention, and those kind of rules about how they're going to go forward have to be really seen. We know the Democratic National Convention at this point, if the contingency plan was if Biden were to step down, that there would be a virtual delegate vote. So it's not like we're going to be watching in 3 weeks this all unfold and having a brawl on the Democratic National Convention floor, but we are going to see in the next few days, actually, I think the candidates that want to vie for an open convention to really come out and say, hey, just because Joe Biden endorsed Kamala Harris doesn't mean it's a done deal. We now have to deal with the rules of the Democratic National Convention, and there are rules that are put in place that she'll have to earn her nomination just like others, and whether they actually go on a virtual convention delegate vote and zoom it out, I think that's what we're really going to see. But what we are watching is a fissure in the Democratic Party. And even though Joe Biden said we need to unify, just like what Trump said, by the way, the messages of the two party are not very different in this regard. But the fissures in the Democratic Party, it was the original big tent party. We have the very progressives, the very liberals, we have the more moderates. Then we have those that were never Trumpers that came into the Democratic fold because they didn't like Donald Trump and his policies. And now we're going to have to see, can they come together behind one candidate? The progressives are already coming out and saying there's only one way forward, and that's Kamala Harris. But that's just not true. And what we're going to have to see is whether those fissures can be healed and whether or not the Democrats can really come together to fight Donald Trump and the momentum that Trump-Vance ticket is really presenting to them.
We're going to hear from Republicans, and we're already hearing from Republicans like Senator Rick Scott, who is saying that if the president cannot seek re-election, then why should the president be in the Oval Office? So do you expect Republicans to try to make sure that this narrative is out there during this time to say that, hey, maybe the president should leave the Oval Office in general?
Well, one thing we know about the Republican Party is that they're excellent at messaging. And Newt Gingrich came out even before Joe Biden announced that he was stepping down from the nomination, already questioning his ability to actually serve out his term. We know that Rick Scott will do anything to undercut the president as well as align himself with Donald Trump, hoping for, if he becomes president, a cabinet spot, as will Marco Rubio, who is out talking about how left-wing Kamala Harris is. But that's just the messaging of politics. And that's all it is. I do not expect Joe Biden to be stepping aside and actually resigning and elevating Kamala Harris to be president. And actually, the Republicans, if they did their calculus, would know that that's a bad idea. Because if Kamala Harris ascends to the presidency, her exposure, her ability to get some things done, her ability to reach America in a much different way as a president, even if only for a moment, is a much harder competition or campaign than if they go to this convention, even if it's on a Zoom, and battle it out. So I think right now the Republicans are trying to hold on to whatever message they can to weaken the Democratic Party. That's called politics, but I don't think it's going to result in Joe Biden stepping down.
Real quick, just coming in from Donald Trump on his social media platform, Truth, I will read as follows. Crooked Joe Biden was not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve and never was. He only attained the position of president by lies, fake news, as I just bring myself up here, and not leaving his basement. All those around him, including his doctor and the media, knew that he wasn't capable of being president, and he wasn't, and he wasn't. And now look at what he's done to our country with millions of people coming across our border, totally unchecked and unvetted, many from prisons, mental institutions, and record numbers of terrorists. We will suffer greatly because of his presidency, but we will remedy the damage he has done very quickly. And then in all capital letters to end this post, make America great again, ! Tara, how do you put into words the different trajectories of both parties right now? You had a raucous RNC with people wearing fake bandages on their ear after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. Now you have really an unprecedented territory, the Democratic Party. Their midterm president here dropping out of the race, not seeking another 4-year term. And there being question marks as to who is the real leader of the Democratic Party going forward. How do you describe the fact that one party is going up and seemingly the other party appears to be somewhat lost at this point in time, really 106 days before the election?
I think that describing it as lost might be the wrong way. This might be the reinvigoration that Democratic Party was seeking. This might be the enthusiasm that is needed to have a real competition. I do want to say before we go further, though, I guess all of the call for unifying America and safe political speech has gone out the window after the Republican convention. We're back to the same messaging that we saw from Donald Trump before. You know, at the Republican convention, there was almost a more presidential way about how he held himself. He was almost more demure, more historically aligned with our other presidents. And this messaging right after Joe Biden has pulled out of the race is more of what we had during the 4 years of his presidency. And I think if Donald Trump continues with that kind of messaging, it's going to reveal that political violence that we kind of was describing as a changed man afterwards is really not the truth, and that the Republican Party is going to lean into this kind of rhetoric. But don't count out the Democrats. This is an opportunity for them to be nimble, to be visionary, and we have only seen an open convention twice, and it went very well for those two candidates, for Lincoln and FDR. So although it right now looks like the Democratic Party is, you know, having a meltdown, it's like a phoenix, just like anything. Sometimes you need to burn the house down to rebuild. And this week will tell us if they're able to rebuild or if they'll lay in ruins and the Republican Party will just swoop into November strong and loud and have a big win.
Yeah, I want to hop in here though, Tara, and Ty, I want you to hop back in here in a second. But Tara, here's the thing that you and I have talked about on previous live streams. You and I, it can take years to strategically put together a presidential campaign, not even just a presidential campaign, a campaign for any other office really on a federal level across the United States, right? So it takes a long time to build momentum, prove your candidacy. So you're talking about there being just over 100 days between now and Election Day, and you're trying to change the minds of not just the voters who would fall under undecided, but you're also trying to stoke that fire within your own base, within the Democratic Party. Is it realistically doable with 106 days to go before Election Day, when in reality it can take years to build a presidential profile?
I'd actually say you have less time than that, right? Because if we're talking about a virtual delegate nomination, you're talking a week or so, because the first states that will have to have a ballot out are going to be in the first part of August. And so you're going to have a deadline that has to be met in order to the Democratic nominee's name to be on the ballot in those states. And so you have less than 106 days. But right now, because of the call for Joe Biden to step down, many leaders in the Democratic Party are not just looking at Joe Biden, but they're looking at the swing states, the states that we know for sure are pivotal. They're the linchpins. It's the Wisconsin, it's the Michigan, it is the Pennsylvania. And they're saying, okay, maybe we don't have a traditional Democratic campaign process, but what we do have is the element of surprise. Remember, although a traditional trajectory for a president would need all that time that you described, this is unprecedented. And for the first time in Donald Trump's political history, instead of he being the disruptor, his campaign is being disrupted. And if the Democratic Party can harness their understanding of American voters, where they land in that big tent of Democrats, and including the no party affiliates that in Florida we have so many of, if they can craft a message through the top of the ticket and the vice president, it doesn't matter that it's not the traditional way. It could mean a voter enthusiasm and voter turnout that we haven't seen since 2020 or President Obama. So I think we have to set aside all of our old expectations of how a campaign is going to go and really focus on the next week and whether that virtual delegate process is going to unfold and whether Kamala can really be competitive. There's a lot of talk about Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. Maybe he would be on the ticket with Kamala. Gretchen Whitmer, my home state of Michigan, she pulls out of the stratosphere. I mean, she's very well loved in Michigan and she's polling very high in the national polls. And so we have a lot of different folks that we could really craft together. But I don't think the Democrats, even though there are some calls for saying Kamala's got to be it, if they see Kamala's polling numbers are just as bad, if not worse than Joe Biden's, it would be just a different kind of disaster to give her a fait accompli as being the nominee.
I want to bring in Ty here in just a second, but really quickly, going to WFLA.com to check out our poll results. This is a live ongoing poll. So if you are joining us on Facebook, if you're joining us on YouTube, you can go to WFLA.com. You can vote in this right now, and we might see the results change live here on your screen. We asked in unscientific way, did President Biden make the right decision in dropping out of the presidential race? 75% saying right now yes, 25% saying no. We will revisit this over the course of the stream. Ty?
Yeah, so Tara, we talked yesterday when we did an interview. We talked about how some Democrats, like Congresswoman Kathy Castor, her concern, she was one of the first Florida Democrats to come out against President Biden seeking re-election. She said we needed someone to articulate the message of the Democrats, because nobody was able to cross that line to talk about policy because there was a cloud hanging over them about whether the president should or should not seek re-election. So after I was talking with Congresswoman Kathy Castor just about her concerns were mostly about down the ballot issues, because she's in a pretty safe seat for a Democrat in Hillsborough County. But when it comes to down the ballot issues, like in the state of Florida, you have legalizing marijuana, you have enshrining abortion access. So there are a lot of issues that Democrats are worried about. So what does this mean for those down the ballot issues with President Biden stepping aside?
I think it's good news. I think it's good news for the idea that all politics is local, because his candidacy was a distraction. It distracted from not only down ballot issues like right to choose and marijuana, it distracted from local candidacies, and it also distracted from the policy, like the Project 2025 discussion. How much of that Heritage Foundation project is influencing the Republican Party? It was distracting us from really controversial candidates on county commission races, like where I'm from in St. Petersburg, where there were some very ultra-right candidates running in local primaries that we weren't talking about at all, because we were so focused on, can Joe Biden hold on? And so I think that no matter who the Democrats choose, this is going to do nothing but good things for not only their candidates, but their issues. So it's also going to do good things for democracy, because now everyone in America is turning their attention on a race. Right before Biden pulled away, I was looking at new polling numbers for young voters. I work at St. Petersburg College.
They were in free fall, right?
But yeah, they were. Never in all my 25 years of teaching did I see such low voter engagement. And students were having a really hard time wanting to connect. They didn't want to talk. And they certainly didn't want to come out and vote, because they were faced with what they were articulating as two bad choices. So now at least they can feel that they've been heard. I think a lot of America right now is feeling like they've been heard, that Joe Biden is listening, the Democratic Party is listening and saying, okay, we heard that he wasn't the right guy. We're going to pull him out, and now we're going to see this, how the Democratic Party really works, the convention and the rules work, and that's all part of the democracy. And by the way, just as a side note, I saw a lot of Republicans today come out and say, oh, Joe Biden can't leave the race. There was all these millions of people that voted in the primary for him. Yes, that's true, but the party rules allow for that to happen. So this isn't against the will of democracy. There's a lot of Americans that aren't even a Republican or a Democrat. Does that mean because they weren't necessarily, they're from closed primary states like the state of Florida, so they didn't even have access to some of those primaries? So that's a red herring. And really, the democracy is really robust. It's healthy. This is the right thing to do in response to the American voters who said, hey, Biden wasn't the right guy. Lots has changed since January, February, March, when we had our primaries. And I think that we should be really excited and reinvigorated, just as Americans and as voters, that the process is working. We shouldn't be afraid of it. We should trust our neighbors and hope that the information that gets out there, that we can have good choices. But we do have to now lean into the Democratic National Convention and Democratic National Committee rules that will really reveal how at this point in the nomination process, they can choose who's going to be the nominee.
But Tara, what about seniors, like the older voters who were really backing President Biden? And what about minority groups? We have Blacks and Latinos who were still standing by President Biden. What happens to those three groups?
Well, the great part about the Democratic Party right now that's a little bit different than the Republican Party is that they haven't shifted their policy views, and they haven't shifted who they feel that they represent. And I'm not saying that the Republicans don't represent everyone. I'm saying their new Republican Party platform looks a heck of a lot different than the old one. And so people are trying to understand how they intersect, how they fit in with that. Well, Democrats have always been an advocate for older Americans. They've always been an advocate for minority groups. They've always been an advocate for the working man. And so I don't think that changes with the top of the ticket. If you notice in the Republican National Convention, a lot of the messaging that was traditionally a Democratic messaging, like pro-labor, big tent party, everyone's welcome, that started to be mirrored and parroted at the Republican National Convention. And now whether or not they can hold on to that message and actually demonstrate with policy and decisions that to be true, we have yet to see. That'll unfold over the next couple months. But I'm not worried about our older Americans, and I'm not worried about our minority Americans with the Democratic Party because they've had such a long, storied relationship with the Democratic Party. I don't think they're going to be marginalized. I do worry about it being confusing, especially in states like Florida, where we've had lots of changes in accessing mail-in ballots and early voting. We've talked about that a lot, Ty, in the past. You know, all the changes in the last 2 years in Florida, it's a head scratcher. You got to, really be paying attention to all the rules. But that's why we have to be, paying attention to our neighbors, making sure that we get out and say, hey, can I help you in any way? And make sure that we get the information out to all voters so they can participate in the process.
I want to point out this date, June 27th, 2024. Tara, is that going to go down as the most consequential presidential debate of all time? Are we in this position now, today, without Biden's debate performance being as poorly received as it was on that day?
I think that textbooks will be writing about what you call political malpractice, that the Biden campaign thought they had no choice but to put him on a debate stage to show that he could handle it. And he could not in the same way that Joe Biden 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago could. And I don't think just the debate will be part of that narrative in that textbook. I think you'll also see the two very difficult interviews that we saw afterwards. I think those were just difficult to digest. And instead of it being an ugly thing, I think it really is going to be a telling thing that in America, we not only love our statesmen, but we want to make sure that they're up to the task and that we're not a cult of personality, that we had the wherewithal to say, Joe Biden, you might be beloved and you've served our country for so many years, but we know that democracy and our care of democracy is more important than our relationship with you. And I think that's going to be a stark contrast to what you saw out of the RNC, because the RNC is been remade in the image of Donald Trump and what he sees as important. And many people fear the Trump-Vance ticket, because if Vance is Trump 2.0 or MAGA 2.0, then his ultra-conservative policies might be the next direction that the Republican Party goes in. And they're really following Donald Trump. And if that is what you believe, there is nothing inherently wrong with that. But I think what the Democratic Party's done, what Joe Biden has done, is saying, hey, listen, this is about more than me and more than my candidacy. It's more than just about the Democratic Party. It's about democracy and what's the most healthy for it. And I'll take the risk and see if we can quickly and nimbly be able to be responsive to the Democratic National Convention nomination process. But I'd rather trust the American people with that than to really promote myself and my own candidacy. And so it was a real selfless move. It was a sacrifice, I think, for him personally, but I think it's one of his last moments that will probably be his narrative in that textbook, JB, which is others before self. And a lot of us in this country believe that, live by that. And I think that's really at the heart of democracy too.
Streaming live from your local election headquarters, I'm JB Biunno, here live across Nexstar station websites, apps across the country, as well as here out of Tampa, Florida, to our WFLA audience. Also joining us are you on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, the social media audience. We're bringing in your comments at some point here in the live stream. Also going to be talking about your poll results. We're going to be launching more poll questions, but this one is live from WFLA.com. Did President Biden make the right decision in dropping out of the presidential race? And we're now 2 percentage points higher than we were the last time we checked in. 77% of people saying yes, 23% of people saying no. I want to talk about the Republican Party real quick. I want to talk about the other side. If you, Tara, if you're a Republican strategist hearing this news this afternoon, whether you were getting ice cream or whether you were out on the beach, wherever you were, you get this news. Is this celebratory news for the Republican Party? Is this news where that thrusts you into action to start to get an idea as to who could be Trump's opponent come November? And is it a completely new race and there's a call to action, an urgency there? Or do you think that if you're a Republican strategist, do you think that this is in the bag, done, and it's Trump's to lose in November?
I think that the momentum that came out of the RNC was so robust and so energized for Republicans that Joe Biden was the only person that has beaten Trump. And so when he has stepped down, I think that in some ways is like the hand, scratching, kind of like, oh my gosh, who could now beat Trump? But this is a time where we have to lean into polling and data. It's all about whether or not Kamala Harris is the nominee. And I think the Democrats have to make the really important calculus. And that calculus is this: does Kamala poll high enough to be competitive? And are they willing to make the progressives and part of the Black America that aligned with Kamala Harris angry if they don't select her? And there's a lot of the Democrats that are saying, well, listen, she can possibly be the nominee, but she's going to have to roll up her sleeves and fight for it, just like any other would-be nominee. And so I think Republicans are going to be doing what the Democrats are doing right now, which is looking at the polling data and saying, if it's Kamala, maybe this isn't such a bad deal because the polling numbers for Kamala Harris are not high. Okay, they're almost worse than Joe Biden's. And so if she is the fait accompli, they're going to be high-fiving one another. Okay, but I think we just have to wait and see, because if the Democrats are really ready to take a risk, you might see something that energizes the Democratic Party like you haven't seen in years.
And then I've been looking for some Republican comments here. And this is an example of what Republicans are saying. This is coming from Evan Power, who is with the Florida Republican Party. He sits over that one. And this is an example of some of the conversations that are happening nationally among Republicans. He says, quote, "Weekend at Biden's is over. Joe Biden's announcement confirms what we've been saying for years. Democrat leadership has failed Americans by propping up someone unfit to do the job. Every Democrat Party leader, especially Vice President Harris, is complicit in this sham presidency, and voters will hold them accountable this November." And so he goes on to talk about more of why he believes that this was, quote, a sham presidency. But will we hear more of that? Will that amp up that kind of talk against the Democratic Party from Republicans? Will we hear that across the nation even more this week?
Well, Ty, we just read, JB read to us, former President Trump's Twitter or Truth Social, feed. And so we're coming back to that old rhetoric that we all were so careful in the last couple of weeks after former President Trump had been shot to not engage in, because it creates this temperature that some people blow, and it creates political violence. But what's interesting about this is that I do think I think Donald Trump has shown he's the top of the ticket. He's the party leader. When he did that True Social post that was very like the Trump of old, inflammatory with a lot of I think politically charged and divisive language, we're going to see that parroted across not only Florida, but all across the country. But I got to tell you something. That's good for Democrats because one of the things that Democrats got so frustrated with last week is that no one was talking about the extreme conservative policy that JD Vance had represented. Nobody was talking about the Heritage Foundation's 2025 in a meaningful way. And nobody was talking about what the new white papers that were coming out of the Republican National Convention were going to mean for everyday Americans. And so now, with that kind of rhetoric revealing itself again, we might see the dial being turned back to 2020 when Joe Biden won big because America was so tired of the chaos and the ugliness of that kind of rhetoric. It just depends on whether or not the Democrats can choose a candidate that can highlight those differences. They can say, listen, that's not true. He was at the helm of the greatest infrastructure investment, the lowest unemployment, our fight against prescription drugs and making sure that individuals had access to affordable scripts and really focus on those issues that most of us are worried about at our kitchen tables. And if that candidate can do that, that kind of rhetoric is going to drive people rather than to the Republican Party away from it.
But
Ty, go. I have another poll, but
yeah.
right after.
Okay, so peel back the curtain for us because I'm just thinking with the Biden campaign and those workers were told all last week up until probably yesterday that the president is in, the president is staying. You need those workers, those staff members to help you if you plan to cross the finish line and be in the White House. So for all of those Democrats who are working for the Biden campaign, what are they thinking? What's going on? What's next for them? Were they lied to?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, just like when Governor DeSantis, who was making his long run for the presidency, when his candidacy ended, most of those campaign staff members were absorbed into offices. And so I think what you'll see is a lot of these Democratic campaigners that work in the campaign industry, they will end up holding their breath, waiting to see who the Democratic candidate's going to be and whether they can participate in helping them get elected in their profession. And if not, listen, I was in campaigns for a long time. You end up working with other Democratic leaders or in government in some way. Most of these people are into the service of their country through campaigns and through government work. And I don't think that they were lied to at all. This is just the nature of campaigns.
I want to go now to this next poll. Check this out from WFLA.com, an unscientific poll. We are asking folks who they think will be the next Democratic presidential nominee. Now, as you would expect, Kamala Harris is the leading vote getter currently, as she is the one that Biden has currently endorsed for president. However, some other names on here that have been plucked out of some of the, the names that have risen to the top when it comes to the conversation about who is the future of the Democratic Party in this country. Senator Mark Kelly out of Arizona, Governor Gavin Newsom, another from California. I want to let's just kind of circle Newsom here for a second, because that's somebody who gets a lot of attention, even when he looks dead into the camera and says, I am not running, I am supporting Biden. There is still a lot of talk around Gavin Newsom. Tara, do you believe that there are going to be those on this screen and off this screen who are going to be changing their tune a little bit and perhaps re-engaging the conversation?
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you're doing this poll because this poll came out again this morning on one of the major cable stations. And actually it was Mark Kelly who had polled at the highest this morning. But, I think there is a certain amount of loyalty that we watched from the Gavin Newsoms, the Gretchen Whitmers, and the like, that were all sort of, everyone was looking to see, could they possibly make a run for it? But there was that idea that I'm going to wait my turn. Joe Biden has earned this second run. He's gotten the primary votes. That's all over now. The game is totally changed. And so I think you're going to start to see a lot more discussion from those candidates that would be 2028 candidates now. But let's talk about the reality of Gavin Newsom. The reality of Gavin Newsom is you would have a governor of California and fighting against a former U.S. senator, which is Kamala Harris from California. That's going to be an interesting kind of show if they go head to head. And then you also have to deal with the reality that mid-America thinks California is way too left. And so that might pose a little bit of a problem of really trying to run a Gavin Newsom. Those kind of things have to be worked out. And remember, we only have a couple weeks until that virtual delegate roll call is going to happen. So that's going to happen rather quickly. We also have to look at the fact that who's got the electoral college votes, who's got the swing states, who's going to actually help elect the next president. And that becomes a very shrewd conversation. And that's why some people say the Kentucky choice, Bashir, maybe someday, but not right now. What does he really bring to the table? People like Whitmer, people like Josh Shapiro, even Wes Moore has been discussed as a possible candidate. I think those are the individuals that can really deliver for the Democratic Party, are the ones that are really viable.
I'm putting a comment here on YouTube and on Facebook Live, and I'm asking for people to respond. Who do you think should run? Who do you think should be the Democratic nominee? Let's bring in some of our live audience here. How about, and you know what, Tara, I'm going to go back to this full screen real quick as we wait for people to use our hashtag system here. I'm going to engage with them in just a second. You see that these are some of the names that people would expect to throw their name into the race. Is there a name on here you don't see that captures your imagination if you're a Democratic strategist? Somebody who would fall under other, that 23% that, you know, people are voting right now and they think that somebody who's not among this 6 right now, somebody that could come out of left field and spark some true imagination with where this country should go in the next 4 years. Give me a name.
Well, I got a name texted to me, but I don't think it's a very viable one. There's a lot of old time Democrats that felt that Hillary Clinton had really missed her moment. And the minute that this happened, the idea of resurrecting her as a candidate, but that is a no-go I think for her personally and for the country, because she just never, even though she had 3 million more votes, she wasn't able to capture the imagination of the Electoral College in a way that was meaningful. I don't think that that's going to happen. But I do think that this kind of creativity about looking for leaders is an important one. But although we need to be quick and responsive, I don't know if you can really run out another name than what you had up there. And let's just take a look back at that screen though for a second, if you can, JB, because one of the names on there that's interesting that you wouldn't have thought is the North Carolina, Roy Cooper. And that's really because of the ultra-conservative stuff that's happening in North Carolina and the pushback against that. And that tells you something. That says America, even in states that have previously been red, America's really looking for that centrist policy, that candidate that's going to be able to bridge the gap between Republicans and Democrats. The fatigue of the political discord is so great. I think the Democratic Party is going to take that into consideration when they're choosing someone.
I want to, folks, use hashtag HeyJB. We'll also look for hashtag HeyTara, and we're going to start to spotlight some of the comments that are coming in. How about Dennis here on Facebook Live throwing out a name that probably feels lost to time for many folks that are really not following the Democratic Party too closely these days. But Elizabeth Warren is a name that has come up in our comment section. This is someone we haven't really heard from going back for a few years, at least in as far as a presidential nominee potential.
I think that Elizabeth Warren has done wonderful things for our country as a U.S. Senator. But it was almost like that bench of the Democratic Party in 2020 has sort of graduated with Joe Biden. They've turned the corner generationally. They don't have that young appeal. Remember what this is all about. Joe Biden is stepping down, not just because of his mental acuity, because it's not any more questionable than the 78-year-old Donald Trump. It's really because the optics of Joe Biden make him look like he's older and he can't keep up. And, I think Elizabeth Warren is a wonderful leader, but American voters, and I think Democratic leaders are saying, we want to be responsive to voters. And they're saying, we want somebody younger, somebody who can usher in a whole new generation of Democrats. And she doesn't fit that bill.
Well, then you're not going to like this potential pick from Jen here on YouTube Live because, Joe Biden, 81 years old, Bernie Sanders, 82 years old. She says, my thought on other would be Bernie Sanders. He was a top pick before Biden. There are going to be those very, very loyal Bernie Sanders followers that go back perhaps decades, people that have loved Bernie's brand of American progressive politics. But again, same sort of conundrum there. You're talking about somebody who's would be 1 year older than the current president.
I mean, I feel the burn. I love Bernie. I mean, and he came out with a wonderful New York Times opinion to support Joe Biden. But remember, he hails from Vermont, has less than 600,000 people in Vermont, doesn't really mean, is not very meaningful in the electoral college calculation. And at this moment in time, we're not nominating, we're not going through the primary process is what I mean to say. We're actually having to do the hard work for the Democratic Party of actually using the rules to nominate a candidate. And so, this isn't giving months and months and years, like we talked about earlier, time to vet a candidate. We've got to find someone quick, and we have to be listening to why Joe Biden is stepping down. He's stepping down for many reasons, most of it which have to do with his age. So although Bernie Sanders has captured the imagination of America for many, many decades, I think his time in the sun is done.
I love live streaming because we get great questions, including from Bubonic Gaming here, #KJB. Do you guys think this is a good time to make history and vote third party? You know that somewhere right now, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is having a very interesting afternoon, and I'm sure that his phone is ringing off the hook as far as how this involves him. Tara, is a third-party candidate more viable now than ever, or is it still just a sort of this fringe possibility that never really will ever come to fruition?
Well, I love the enthusiasm about wanting to express yourself politically and have political efficacy in a way that's true to yourself. I think that's excellent. The problem with third parties is that in our system, they're meaningful for two real reasons. The first is that they often introduce what we call wedge issues, issues that move the electorate and move the policy towards something that one of the other two parties ignored, okay? And so they're important for that. They introduce ideas that the two-party system is somewhat ignored. And the other real sort of transactional effect of a third party is they siphon votes. And so, it's a little bit scary if we want a real competition to lean into the third party, because America isn't made up of a lot of third party alliances. And so if we go down that road right now, you're going to have a splintered election, and it's going to catapult Donald Trump to the top of the ticket. But what I'd like to encourage the viewers to really think about, though, is that this is a great time to dig in. What do some of these third-party candidates really, what do they really believe? What does Donald Trump really believe? What will the nominee for the Democratic Party really believe? And let the distraction about the optics of someone being too old go away, and start focusing on what the work of government is supposed to be, which is what is the policy and how will that lift our communities and our country up?
Our poll results are changing in real time because more and more people are going to WFLA.com and casting their vote in a no sign up, unscientific social media based poll. But again, you don't have to sign up. It's a one tap poll by clicking on the link in the description on this video. You can also go to WFLA.com and you'll see the poll right there. The link to the poll right there on the home screen. But Kamala Harris, support for her in our poll unofficially growing, and other is starting to take more of a backseat. It was in the low 20s just a couple of moments ago. Not receiving as much love is Roy Cooper, the aforementioned governor of North Carolina, and Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who we have always heard about as a potential presidential candidate on the Democratic ticket in, maybe the next few election cycles, whether it be 2028 or beyond. Again, we're reacting with Tara here to your comments here. You can use #KJB or #HeyTara to have your poll vote featured, or if you want other to be represented, let us know. Meg D says #KJB. What about Mark Kelly? And Mark Kelly, somebody quite popular, but is he presidential material? Has been a question that has surrounded him for some time, because not a traditional politician by any means. I don't know. You could make the argument, Tara, that the idea of what a traditional politician is anymore is completely thrown out the window. Right.
That's out the window. That's out the window. But Mark Kelly was floated this morning as a real polling very high. Of course, he's had a storied history with his wife being a victim of a shooting. His
Gabby
own
Giffords.
Yes, and his own interesting career prior to politics. I think you got to remember that this is just moments after Joe Biden has left us with an historic announcement, and that there's going to be a lot of discussion about would-be candidates. And as we're watching your live poll, JB, it's interesting to me because I think as people watch the news unfold, it's sort of the natural inclination to want the vice president to ascend to that role. But I think that we're in a unique time that we've got to think outside of the box, that Kamala Harris may not be the actual nominee. She might be, but she might not be as well. And I think that is going to have to do with a lot with not just polling, but donors. Listen, one of the parts of politics that we don't talk about a lot is you got to follow the money. And if Kamala Harris can capture the imagination of big donors after those donors were somewhat holding their donations back because Joe Biden was so worrisome to them. That was the story last week, right? Big donors were not giving to the Biden campaign, worrying and waiting to see what would happen. If Kamala Harris can capture the imaginations of those large donors, if she can perform well on the polls, then perhaps she will be the nominee. Now, there was something that I was thinking about in terms of the next debate, because we're coming upon that time where we're going to start to see a discussion about the next presidential debate. The one thing out of all those would-be candidates that we've been talking about that would be so interesting is that Kamala Harris is a former prosecutor. And so out of all of those would-be Democratic nominees, she would be the most interesting to give Donald Trump a run for his money, because that's what she did for a living. And she's got a real way about her. Of course, she also served on the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee. I don't know if you remember, but she was very pointed in her questioning of Brett Kavanaugh when he was being vetted in his confirmation hearing for the Supreme Court. So she has no fear. She knows how to go for the jugular, and she knows how to stay on message. And so she would be interesting to see debate Donald Trump. But again, we got to follow the money. We got to follow the polls. And we just don't know enough just yet to know what Democratic leadership is really thinking. In part, yesterday, when Nancy Pelosi did her speech, we were all sort of holding our breath, hoping that maybe she would reveal some of her own thoughts. We know that she had placed important strategic phone calls to Biden advisors, trying to figure out if Joe Biden had been insulated from the polling numbers, if he really knew how bad it was in terms of the country's lack of enthusiasm for his presidency. But she didn't reveal anything, and that's really her calling card. She's always very close to the vest, but we don't know if she's going to be in support of Kamala Harris or someone else. I think at this point, Nancy Pelosi is often seen as the matriarch of the country. And at this point, it would be interesting to be inside her head to know whether or not the calculus of the next nominee, who that would be, if it would be following Kamala Harris or someone else that can bring in the money and bring in the votes.
Not to mention, too, and I want to get back to some of the comments that are coming in, because we do have a lot of hashtag-based comments to get to from our live social media audience, but it's a ticket. So if it's Kamala Harris, then who is the running mate on a Kamala Harris ticket? If it's not Kamala, who is then the two-person ticket that would be really coming out of somewhat of left field to challenge?
I mean, this is a
Trump
drinking
fans?
game, JB. We need to pour a drink and have a drinking game with this, because could it be Kamala Harris and Josh Shapiro? Because then Josh delivers Pennsylvania. Could it be Kamala Harris and Gretchen Whitmer, because Whitmer is a slam dunk for Michigan's electoral college votes? You'd have two women at the top of the ticket. Now that's interesting. And that's very interesting because at the Republican National Convention, the tenor and the tone was very masculine. It had really leaned into, a lot of people were saying that women and minorities, although highlighted in special personal stories, weren't necessarily embraced in the leadership piece of the Republican National Convention, other than, of course, Donald Trump's daughter-in-law being a part of the committee that put it on. But beyond that, you didn't see a lot of strong Republican women really being in leadership positions at the convention. And it really, some people said, although it had some conciliatory tones, it also had a lot of masculine tones, with all of the Hulk Hogan and Dana White and sort of all of that posturing. And so that would be really something else to see Kamala Harris and a Gretchen Whitmer ticket. And that would be a stark contrast of the two Americas areas that were really seen being divided between these two candidacies, even the Biden-Trump candidacy. One vision of America aligned with Donald Trump's, which looks a lot like America of a long time ago, and another vision for America that looks like a much more progressive and diverse kind of America that might be the reality in more city and densely populated states than in rural America, where a lot of this messaging is coming out of.
I think we have another 10 minutes, Tara. Does that work for you and your schedule?
Absolutely. I can do 10 minutes.
Okay,
Absolutely.
great. Sharon Cortez on Facebook Live says hashtag Kamala Harris. Want to know about on YouTube Live says hashtag KJB. I think the Democrats need to select someone without too much baggage. It's too easy to make Kamala Harris look bad. Sure pick someone who is qualified, but get someone who is uncontroversial. April, just kind of going through a bunch of comments that have built up in our queue. And again, use hashtag KJB or hashtag KTara to have your comment featured on screen. April Floyd, Vice President Kamala Harris will get it done for all women. It's time, ladies, to get busy, says hashtag KTara there. And then, okay, so here's a name. You ready for a name? You ready, Tara?
I'm ready.
Cliff says hashtag KJB. How about a ticket of Michelle Obama and Kamala Harris?
I mean, I think that's a drop mic moment, but, good luck getting Michelle Obama to come back into the public life. She was actually courted many times and has made it extremely clear that her time in public service was as first lady with her husband, and that is not her trajectory. I got to tell you, that'd be one hell of a ticket. In my house, I have 2 daughters and 2 sons, and they all like to say, if women ran the world, we get a lot more done because, we get, as moms and women, we get a lot done. But I'm not sure that all of America necessarily sees it that way, and nor should it maybe. Maybe it's a good idea to think about the most qualified and who can actually bring policy to the table, whether they're a man, a woman, or otherwise. One name that no one's mentioned that has captured the hearts of many Americans.
Yes. Drop a.
Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who is our Secretary of Transportation. He is our first openly LGBTQ plus cabinet member. And he is so articulate, is such a centrist, and is such a statesman in his time in the cabinet. And of course, he ran for president in 2020, and it was really a shining star. And no one has floated his name, maybe because America, hasn't really gotten familiar with him too much, or maybe because we have had such a culture war in Florida that we don't think about candidates like that. But I think our country is ready to see it doesn't necessarily matter whether it's a woman or a man, whether they're have children, no children, if they are LGBTQ plus or otherwise, if they can serve our country in a way that brings us all forward. That was a wonderful comment. I think women can do it. I think men can do it. I think anyone that's willing to put their country before themselves is welcome to the table. So I would welcome more women on the ticket. I would welcome Mayor Pete to the ticket. And honestly, whoever becomes the nominee, I guarantee you will see Mayor Pete. If he's not the nominee, which his name hasn't been floated yet, he is an excellent surrogate for the Democratic Party. He is an amazing advocate for the issues. He's able to laser focus, make it clear and understandable. And I think whoever is chosen, he's going to be out there as an advocate for that nominee.
Given that he's a cabinet member, is he an extraordinarily logical, almost like just shoe-in fit as a potential running mate? Should it be Kamala Harris at the DNC?
I think that's a great idea. I think we should text ourselves hashtag JB, hashtag Tara. I love that idea. The stark contrast would be very interesting to America. Listen, this isn't just a horse race. This is about the race for America's future. And so we have 2 very different ideas about what America is going to look like. And I think that would be exceptionally clear to America. You'd have a Black woman and a man who served in the military, who is married to his husband with their 2 beautiful adopted children, and him as her running mate against Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, who has ultra-conservative policies that aren't always favorable to women, especially women who choose to not build a family with children. And so America would be really seeing very clearly what the Republican Party's embraced and what the Democratic Party's embraced, and not be mired up with all this discussion about the optics and really focus on the issues. So I like that idea, JB. That's a good idea.
It's certainly, I mean, if someone is already serving in the cabinet, has familiarity with how that administration is run, and you're looking to continue on with the next phase of a Biden presidency, but without Biden, it just seems, it seems
One
like
more
it's a possibility for sure. I'm sorry, Tara. What was that?
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I got excited about your idea. And and what's also interesting about the Mayor Pete, and you heard it first, JB called it.
No.
So if it happens, JB, you're prophetic in this. But what's interesting about Mayor Pete is him and his husband live in Traverse City, Michigan, and they have their family there, and so they would have the home state advantage, and it might be a way to get the Michigan voters engaged, which is the electoral count, that's the account, the swing state kind of, it's been discussed, you can't win the race without Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And so Mayor Pete might be able to not only kind of balance the ticket between a man and a woman, and also bring in Michigan. So it's a good strategic idea, good strategery. Isn't that what Donald Trump called it?
I am a humble reporter. I am not a strategist by any means. I'm just throwing out potential concepts for what the next few weeks could look like, because is this going to be, Tara, we're talking about how the presidential debate, what will end up being just the one single debate in this cycle between Trump and Biden. Obviously, they will not debate as previously scheduled in a few months, but we were talking about how that could wind up being one of the most consequential presidential debates in American history, if not the most consequential. Could we be talking about the most consequential DNC in modern American history? Monday, August 19th, so we're still about a month away from the DNC kicking off, and I'm trying to remember the exact city. I believe
it's Chicago.
It is Chicago. So
it
is what is at stake with the DNC, and is this like reality TV almost, but at the political level, on the world's grandest political stage, given that there's so much uncertainty with where the Democratic Party is going right now?
I wish we could say that we had a month until all this drama unfolded, but we don't. The contingency plan with the Democratic National Convention, if a would-be nominee had to drop out, is to have a virtual roll call. And so that's what and that was actually planned. One of the reasons that was pushing Joe Biden to make this decision is that as early as today, there was going to be a virtual roll call to have a virtual nomination of Joe Biden. And once that happened, there was no going back. And so I think it was good timing that he actually went ahead and withdrew from the race. But now we're talking, they're going to have to recalibrate. If they were going to call the virtual delegate roll call any day now, they only have a couple more days from that, because remember, before the DNC actually meets, the ballots in certain states are going to go out. And so this has to be tied up in a nice little bow in the next week or two in order for the time for the ballots to be printed and to be rolled out in states in the first part of August. So the Democratic National Convention that we're going to be seeing at the end of August, and we'll be together, JB, and I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, yeah.
I might be on the floor, I might not. I'm still holding, I'm crossing my fingers right now. But that's going to be a lot like what we saw with the Republican National Convention. So much is going to happen between now and then. All this stuff is going to unfold, but that's going to be a real celebration of the nominee, of the party platform, of the vision for America, of all of the good stuff that Joe Biden has done. That's going to be, that report card is going to be now the nominees report card. They're going to be virtually handed the torch of the Biden administration's legislative wins, and to take it forward. So I think we're going to see another real robust, brouhaha, happy Democratic National Convention, because all the hard work, all the arm twisting, all the negotiation, that's going to happen this week on that Zoom. That's going to virtually happen, that we aren't going to be necessarily privy to.
What's interesting is that it's going to happen on the virtual roll call, but you could make the argument it's happening right now, because my team is passing me notes. We have an endorsement here from Congresswoman Kathy Castor. Her statement reads as follows: Joe Biden is once again showing true leadership by putting the country above all else. He has led one of the most historic presidencies of my lifetime, recovering from the pandemic, massive job growth, lowering prescription drug costs for seniors, investing in infrastructure, increasing gun safety, caring for our veterans, and passing the most sweeping investments in our clean energy future. And now is an exciting time for him to pass the torch. There is a lot at stake in this election, and I have full confidence in Vice President Harris. She is a fighter who stands up for reproductive freedoms, civil rights, lowering costs for families, and lifting up all Americans. I look forward for working for her election and defeating Donald Trump. End quote from Congresswoman Kathy Castor, of course, a Democratic Congresswoman from right here in Tampa. But already, I mean, that's an endorsement. So the endorsement, I mean, they're coming out now in real time where people are basically saying, are you in or are you out on a Harris and insert name here ticket with whomever, of course, a potential running mate would be. So that's all playing out here in real time, as is our poll. We're asking you, who do you think will be the next Democratic presidential nominee? And the numbers are growing, at least in our unscientific social media-based poll, 46% for the current vice president of the United States, Kamala Harris. One last thing I want to point out, because it's, me in live streaming, Tara, over the course of the live stream, different thoughts pop into my head. And here I am talking about how pivotal that debate was in June between Trump and Biden, and how it very well may shape our country's future with the fact that now Joe Biden is stepping out of the race, and of course, it really the avalanche, if you will, towards this historic decision began on that night when social media was abuzz with Joe Biden fumbling his words, losing his spot and answering certain questions, where one candidate was very, very focused on answering questions at hand, and the other just looked 81 years old. We're talking here about perhaps the most consequential presidential debate of our lifetime, but that might only last for a couple of months, Tara, because I'm looking here at the debate schedule. And folks, I want you to circle a date on your calendar. September 10th, 2024, being hosted by ABC News, moderated by David Muir and Lindsay Davis. As of now, that's how it currently shakes out. Location to be determined. The next presidential debate with Donald Trump representing the Republican Party, and insert name here, perhaps Kamala Harris representing the Democratic ticket. Talk about high stakes. I mean, can you put into words, Tara, just how significant the stakes are going to be on that night, which, I mean, look, is less than 2 months from now. We'll be here before you know it.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think not just the debate. Let me back up and just talk about the debate that sort of unfolded Joe Biden's career. I think we use in political science classes the long ago debate Kennedy versus Nixon, and that was the first televised debate that really created a stark difference in how we started to react to candidates and become more candidate centric in our voting. I think that debate between Biden and Trump is going to be used in that same kind of way to teach individuals about, how this can really unfold. But just like the narrative of FDR wasn't about his illness and about his frailty and about any of his foibles, FDR, who was another really strong president that got a lot of social policy forwarded, he's remembered with his accomplishments, his legislative accomplishments. And I think Joe Biden will be too. This will pass. It will be seen as something that's somewhat sad and unsavory, but what he accomplished in his 4 years will be his legacy. But when it comes to September, and that debate stage between Donald Trump and the Democratic National Convention, not just all eyes in Florida, all eyes in America, but all eyes in the world are going to be on that, because Donald Trump is a vector. He is a lightning rod. And, the Europeans are watching our election, because what happens to our economy, what happens to our foreign policy, all affects the rest of the world. And so this is really on the world stage and has huge stakes and huge consequences. And I wonder if it's a Gavin Newsom, if it's a Kamala Harris, if we'll see Donald Trump accept the invitation to actually debate. Because I'll tell you this, Donald Trump's campaign needs to now be worried about a much younger, a much more focused, much more shrewd candidate than Joe Biden, because whoever it is going to be able to tackle the issues in a much different way that Joe Biden failed to do in the debate.
Tara Newsom, our political expert, of course, from St. Petersburg College, professor of political science, who we lean on so
Ah,
often when it comes to our political conversations. Tara, where are you joining us from, by the way? Just a quick.
I I am in northern Michigan with all the other Whitmer people. No, I'm actually on Lake Huron, north of Detroit. So, and I hate to say this to your viewers, but I'm wearing a sweater and my windows are open. It's about 68 degrees. So
Wow.
it's
So
lovely.
a
But
beautiful day for you to go back outside and enjoy some of the incredible weather you're having up there. A humongous thank you for your time.
no, of course, I love spending time with you, and we'll talk soon.
We most certainly will. One last check before we wrap up the live stream. This is a live poll, folks, on WFLA.com. Who do you think will be the next Democratic presidential nominee? Kamala Harris receiving endorsements in real time over just even the last several minutes. They're coming into our newsroom very, very quickly from Florida and beyond. Kamala Harris, the logical successor, being the vice president under Joe Biden. However, there's a lot still to be determined with the future of the Democratic Party. Is Governor Gavin Newsom of California going to emerge as a potential name in this race? Could others here on your screen potentially throw their hat into the race? We, of course, will be following it on your local election headquarters, whether it's on WFLA.com or a Nexstar sister station website or app, or on a social media platform here as well. You can click on the link in the description on this video for more from your local election headquarters. We'll continue to keep you posted on all things ahead of the November presidential election. Thank you so much for joining us here from the Stream Center in Tampa, Florida, your local election headquarters. Again, our poll continues to be live, and more news updates as they come in, whether it be endorsements, additional statements, reactions from governors and senators and congressmen and women across the country. We'll have it for you by clicking on the link in the description on this video. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time from your local election headquarters.